This podcast contains potentially sensitive topics, drug use, and strong language. Listener discretion is advised.
We drove up. It was we were going to meet at 8 o'clock, and took a long drive up and went into a mall parking lot. So it's lit, but it's still sort of deserted, and waited. The suspense was huge. Is this really going to happen? Is he really going to show up? Is it going to be another delay? Are we going to all this trouble for nothing? Is there going to be an argument at the last minute? So he sat and waited, tick-tock, like some kind of prisoner exchange or something happening in a deserted parking lot. And then finally the white pickup truck drove up 20, 30 yards away and stopped.
I'm Rex Holbein, and welcome to You Know Me Now, a podcast conversation that strives to amplify the unheard voices in our community. For the past 13 years, I have been fortunate to meet and spend a great deal of time with thousands of folks living homeless. Through those conversations and friendships, I learned how destructive and baseless the dehumanizing effects of the negative stereotype are against ordinary people who, quite frankly, are just like you and me. In these episodes, I want to remind all of our listeners that the folks who share here do so with a great deal of vulnerability and courage. They share a common hope that by giving all of us a window into their world, they're opening an increased level of awareness, understanding, and connection within our own community. The idea or act of mutual aid has been around for a long time, for a very long time, perhaps in the simplest form from the beginning of time. Mutual aid is nothing more than people coming together in community to take care of each other, often addressing basic needs and human rights that are not being met. The barriers or the reason for needs not being met and or rights not being afforded are often systemic and political. The people who get involved in mutual aid are motivated by the injustices and want to take part in direct action, which includes providing services, advocating for needed systems change, and connections through friendship. In the United States, we see mutual aid groups forming as early as the late 1700s, often by minority groups being oppressed. Today, there has been a resurgence of participation in mutual aid. The COVID pandemic, Black Lives Matter, and homelessness are just a few examples illustrating that the societal systems used to serve us are not adequately meeting the needs of our community. For that reason, people are stepping forward to get involved. In this episode, you'll be hearing from Kaitlyn, a young woman struggling through addiction, homelessness, and loss. When we first met Kaitlyn, she was in her tent suffering from a great deal of physical and emotional pain. She had an abscess located at her lower butt cheek, which was swollen and badly infected. In fact, she was burning up with a high fever. Even worse, for her, she was emotionally distraught over a stranger having taken Prince, her dog, her best friend. Kaitlyn was at a serious low point. Her need for housing, drug rehab, and therapy were unavailable, all dead ends. She was slipping through the cracks. When people are in their moment of deep struggle, we all have difficulty in knowing how best to be of service. It can feel insurmountable. Each person in need has different barriers with different complexities and different abilities. However, what is common to each person is the need for human connection. It begins there. And with this connection, the best path forward, one that is often hidden, begins to reveal itself. A small group of people formed a community and began to get to know Kaitlyn. From those friendships, a path forward for her emerged. Let's begin by getting to know Kaitlyn.
My parents were never together. They were split up before I remember it, really. My dad was a drug addict. My mom was a hidden drug addict. Like, I think the first memory I remember was my dad taking me to the father-daughter dinner dance, like, thing. And, like, we stayed just long enough to take pictures, and then he took me store to store to store to buy Sudafed. I was, like, maybe 9, 10.
And where was that? Where were you born?
Oh, I was born in Everett.
Yeah. Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, at that time, I had one younger brother. He was 2 years younger than me. And I was pretty much, like, the parent role, since, like, the parents in my life kind of really didn't do their job. I remember, like, cooking for me and my brother. I guess that, like, I grew up fast, in a way, I guess.
Kaitlyn's mother remarried, but her biological father continued to come in and out of her life during her childhood.
He was always coming in and out, trying to do what he thought a dad should do, like, just for appearances, pretty much. But he was, at the time, like, he was cooking meth, and so that's kind of what his life was.
Yeah, that controlled him.
Yeah. And then I remember, like, the last time before he ended up going to prison, like, but we got a phone call, and my dad, my biological dad, had been sleeping and high on top of a train down in Everett, and the train started moving, so he tried to get off of it and happened to get sucked up under it, and it cut off his left leg and his right arm, and, like, he survived it. The guy that showed up, like, to work, like, half an hour early and found him, or else he wouldn't have made it,
Would have bled out.
Yeah, but still, it didn't stop him from doing what he was doing.
Yeah. Was your stepdad a positive influence?
Yeah, he was the only, like, real, like, structure and, like, discipline I had. My mom was the type that, oh, you're grounded, and then, like, later that night, drives me to a rave with my friends, But my stepdad, yeah, he was the only one that really kept structure and, like, discipline in the house, When I was 13, I was in middle school, 7th grade, and I got my first girlfriend. She was a little kid with, like, fake piercings at the time, a little goth-looking girl. She was smoking weed, and I remember crying at night, like, so scared for her that, for her smoking weed, and that I begged her to get off the weed, and and then, like, my mom, that later that year, sent me to go stay with my aunt in Alabama because of me going down the wrong path, which was a big mistake. My aunt turned out to be an abusive, physically and mentally abusive alcoholic. And so the only neighbor within, like, 30 miles was the neighbor boy who was 17 years old and a heroin addict. So I tried heroin the first time when I was 12. I did that for about half a month before getting shipped back up here. And obviously I didn't have connections to get that kind of drug. I didn't have connections to get any kind of drug.
So did you finish high school?
No. I dropped out in 9th grade. After going to Linwood High School for, like, a couple of months, I ended up getting kicked out of there for fighting. And then they put me in Scriber Lake Alternative High School, and I was there for a little while and ended up getting kicked out of there, and they tried to put me in the Step Up program, which was at Scriber Lake High School. And after, like, a couple of days, I ended up, like, dropping out and not going anymore after that. I'd started raving, like, going to, like, raves, party raves, and I'd started using ecstasy, and then shortly after, like, within a couple of years after that, I started using, like, meth and heroin. So yeah, at 15, I had gotten a boyfriend at my first rave and moved out with him. So, like, yeah, all sorts of fun. We had our own apartment and everything. And
was he older to get
yeah, I was 15. He was, like, 18.
Kaitlyn is aware that the deck was stacked against her growing up, that the people in her life and the circumstances she faced made it difficult for her. At the same time, she is quick to take responsibility for her decisions. I'm curious, and maybe you don't know the answer to this. At 12, there's no way I could have taken heroin. Do you think that your upbringing and being around drugs, or was there some hurt or anger within you?
Oh yeah, there was childhood stuff that happened that kind of, like, paved the path for that, I think. And I'm not saying by any means that's, it excuses what I did, because anybody can go through what I went through and fucking, decide to become a doctor, but instead I decided to be a drug addict. I got to a point where I was taking like 20 to like, 40, 50 pills in a night. The way ecstasy works, you probably already are aware of this, it plays off the serotonin receptors. So like I was in like a constant like numbness, like of just like blah, like I could see that, I wasn't going down the path that I wanted to go. Because, like, I would remember being a kid and flushing my mom's cigarettes, and, like, saying that, there's two things I'll never do. I'll never do heroin, and I'll never do meth. Because I didn't want to be like my dad. And by 15, I'd already done it. Both. I don't know. I got too involved in the world itself and the crowd itself. Even if I wanted to stop, I'd gotten the boyfriend that like I said, I moved out with. He was only doing ecstasy when I first met him at the rave that I met him at. And he was scared of needles when I first met him. But, like, I ended up going to jail after 6 months of us being together. And one of our mutual acquaintances got him to start shooting up. And so when I got out, he was shooting up heroin. And it was bad. It was all bad. I was making a lot of money doing, like, drug runs and stuff. Like, it was enough to have my own apartment at the Totem Lake Apartments, which is nice apartments. I had a lot of money back then, and that's another reason it was addicting. I saw the power in it. I was 15 years old making more than, probably more than an average attorney. Like, that's insane to think about.
The amount of money Kaitlyn was seeing completely blinded her. It was fueling an ever more expanding and chaotic lifestyle, one that was filled with illegal and personally destructive activities. Kaitlyn became a frequent flyer at the local jails. She witnessed friends overdose and die. Her own addiction had spiraled out of control. In hindsight, she'll tell you that she was a lost kid playing an adult game. Kaitlyn's life found a turning point when she was serving a lengthy prison sentence due to a guilty robbery charge. While inside, she took advantage of an education program.
I think the pinnacle point of, like, what really set me on a track to growing up, and I grew up in prison. I got my good enough degree, so my GED. I remember taking my tests, right? Like, and each one, like, you'll do one a week. And every time I come back from the test, my teacher in there would ask me, how do you think I did? And I said, I failed. You're probably going to have to sign me up again for the next week. And I got high honors on 3 out of 4 of them. And I was only a few points away from the math one to getting high honors as well. I don't know. I know I'm very smart. My picture's up at the Deadends Community College in the EdCap office for summer quarter 2012. Like, I pulled a student of the quarter. I got a 4.0 GPA. I was the highest GPA in my entire class, which was filled up like a lot of adults. I've always had a drive for knowledge. If there's something to be learned, I don't see a reason not to learn it.
Yeah. Where do you think that comes from? Is it part of just your genetic makeup, or is it the fact that maybe the opportunities weren't there and you're reaching out for them? Or?
I think the opportunity was always there. I just was distracted with, other shit, that really wasted a lot of time, And sometimes I get on this, like, stuck in the thought of, like, oh, man, I've wasted all my, my youth. And, now I've got so little time, and I'm like, wait a minute, Kaitlyn, you're only 30.
Kaitlyn got out of prison at the still very young age of 23, and despite the advances she had made, she was released back into homelessness.
I had a sugar daddy at the time. Like, he was pretty much there for, like, when my ex ended up leaving and going, over to Eastern Washington to OMAC to stay with his dad while he was passing away. Like, I kind of found myself after being so codependent and, like, with him every day to having nobody, and, like, out there on the streets alone, no dog, no friends, no family, And I ended up getting reacquainted with a guy named Ron, and he pretty much, we were staying at hotels, and he pretty much saved my life, actually. He was there for
In what
me,
way?
like a lot of ways, like getting me off the streets, being there for me. Got me a freaking Camaro for going to detox. Like, what? And then I made the mistake of going and picking up Jay over at his mom's and bringing him back from Olympia. He got Ron to relapse on crack, which he wasn't using the first, year I was with him.
So you get out, you're 23, Ron really helps you move forward, get you off the street. And how long did that last?
Until Jay beat him up a couple times, and then I ended up going in for emergency surgery because I had air trapped in an abscess on my arm. It was from muscling heroin and meth. But yeah, no, I was in the aftercare after having the surgery, right? And I was supposed to be there for a couple more days, and I had my pit bull, Leo, who I'd had for a while at our apartment and everything. Well, I get a call while I'm in recovery and in my room after the surgery, and Ron says that he has to go into the hospital because something's wrong with him. And this is right as COVID happened, and I'm like, well, what about the dogs? And he's like, they're in the car. I don't know, So I ended up having to leave against medical advice to go take care of the dogs. And like I said, he was my source of income, And so when he went into the hospital, I didn't know he wasn't going to come back. And so for the first few days, I was able to get a room for me and the dog. I ended up rehoming Sadie with a good friend of mine. And I had Leo with me, but it was freezing cold out. Like, I had a Econoline 350 van that I had bought while I was with him. And so, I had all of our stuff from our apartment in that van. After parking at the 155th Safeway in Shoreline for, a few days, I ended up getting a warning I needed to move it. And I moved it, and then ended up going to Everett with a friend of mine with my dog. And I come back, and my van was gone.
Right before Kaitlyn's van was towed and impounded, her boyfriend Jay was arrested on a warrant. She was, once again, all alone, with nothing except her dog Leo. During that time, while out walking, a van pulled up alongside of her and asked about her dog, telling her how beautiful he was.
And they roll their window down. They're like, where'd you get the dog? And I was like, I started talking to him, and I was like, I bought him from a friend, but I just lost my place, and I'm going to have to rehome him. And they're like, are you serious? They ended up pulling into the Ranch 99 parking lot, and they showed me pictures of their dog who had just passed away from cancer that looked identical to my dog. But I remember the little boy saying their old dog's name, and Leo looked up and then, jumped up into their car. I was just going to give them the dog, because I couldn't. He was so cold at night, it was so cold for him. He was a short-haired pit bull, and he would shiver at night, And so, they agreed that they would take him, and when he jumped up in the car, and he looked back at me like, you ready to go, Mom? It broke me. I turned around and I started hyperventilating, crying. And the lady comes up to me and she's like, here. And she hands me $650. And I was like, no, that's not the point of this, And she's like, just take it, you need it. And then I started crying even more. And she gives me another $100. And I remember looking at him, just waiting for me to get in the car with him. It was heartbreaking. It really did break me. It really broke me.
It's also amazing how much unbelievable goodness and kindness, right? That moment, right? Because that money probably was pretty vital for you at that moment.
Yeah, it was able to get me a motel for 2 weeks. Yeah, it was nice. Yeah. It was really nice. In a way, it was I didn't want to have taken the money for that, because then people would be like, oh, you sold your dog. You know what I'm saying? Yep. But the way she did it, it made it feel like that's not what it was,
During her motel stay, Kaitlyn realizes it's time to end the relationship with her partner, Jay. She's had it. But as with many relationships, it's complicated. Running in the same world, he continues to come in and out of her life.
I'd seen everything that he'd taken from me. I'd allowed him to take from me, you know. Because when I first got out of prison, like, I had him come move in with me and everything, you know. I get out of prison November 14th, 2014, and I met my ex-Jay December 7th, and he was my relapse on drugs.
Leaving Jay was a big step forward for Kaitlyn. At about the same time, the federal government began issuing their stimulus checks. For the homeless, it was a huge moment of opportunity, potentially life-altering. Some made the most of it, others not so much. Kaitlyn bought a car to live in. She needed shelter.
We were originally staying in, like, Shoreline area, but, like, they were big on, like, you know, anti-homeless. You know, like, literally, that if they caught you sleeping anywhere in, like, Shoreline, they would tell you, hey, you can't be here, you need to go to Seattle. And sometimes they'd even give you a ride to Seattle.
Along with the car, Kaitlyn also got a new dog, a husky puppy that she named Prince.
You want to take just 2 minutes to just talk about Prince, and then we'll come back to...
Oh, yeah. He's a fluff butt.
He's a what?
He's a fluff butt. His name's Sir Christopher Robin. But yeah, no, he's my everything, honestly. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be alive today. Like, I've gone through hell and back, and there's been a few times within the past year that, I'm serious. I would have ended it if it wasn't for having this dog.
He helped you find your way back.
Oh, yeah, big time. He didn't give me a choice. You know, just because you feel like your life stops, it doesn't mean that he doesn't have to go potty anymore and doesn't need food anymore. You know, it's easy for me to not, you know, take care of myself, but not so easy for me not to take care of him.
He is honestly one of the most beautiful dogs I've ever seen. I'm not just saying that. He's just stunningly beautiful.
He knows it, too. He knows it. He's a good boy, and he's such a cuddler.
And how did you get Prince again?
So, I got Prince when we were getting the disaster relief funds. It was a mixture of that and then the stimulus check money, because they originally asked for $1,250, so $1,250 for him, but we talked him down to $950. We found him on an ad on Craigslist. Once I got him, you know, like, he was only 6 weeks old, and I had my BMW at the time. He's amazing. Like I said, 6 weeks old, he was already potty trained. He potty trained himself. Like, I swear it. Like, he is so beyond smart. Like, it blows my mind.
There'll be people listening to this that will say, this woman's homeless, and she's got a BMW, and she's buying a $900 dog. What is with that?
That's a good question. Like, I didn't want to buy the BMW. My ex that I was with, it was his idea. I'd found a ad for a truck as well as like a fifth wheel. It was a truck, a flatbed truck, and a fifth wheel for like $1,100, and they ran, and I wanted that. But seeing as the RV that my ex had bought with his money that had been stolen from us, he pretty much, forced my hand in getting a BMW. And trust me, like, I can't even tell you how much we argued about it. Like, I was like, why do we need a fucking BMW, dude? Like, we can have a place to live. And he was all about it. He wanted the BMW, wanted the BMW, wanted the BMW.
You were thinking practicality, and he was thinking image.
When the stimulus checks came, everybody I knew all bought dope. They became dope dealers for like a couple weeks before they all fell off, and I didn't want to do that. Like, and I knew that that was what would happen. So I wanted to get something that I would be able to keep, and something meaningful in my life, a reason to wake up in the morning. I never would have thought that I would have gotten something as amazing as him. I had no clue. I was thinking, oh great, I'm gonna be up for potty training this in my car and in the tent. It's gonna be fun. But nope, I got blessed. I got literally blessed. As much as I love him, and I would never change the fact that I got him, nor would ever give him away or sell him. I will never suggest anybody get a husky.
Yeah, but you're also obviously a dog person.
Oh, yeah.
So getting a dog, it wasn't like, oh, I'm lonely, I'm gonna get myself a dog. You actually had dogs, and you were and you knew what you were getting into in this sense. Maybe not with a husky,
Yeah,
totally,
exactly.
but it's a relationship that's important to you.
Yeah.
Kaitlyn's BMW car, or I should say home, didn't last long. She got mixed up in an unfortunate incident where it was totaled and eventually towed. She was back in a tent, now living in Woodland Park. She was still heavily using street drugs, and her now ex-boyfriend Jay, who was living in the same camp area, was a constant source of trouble. At about the same time Kaitlyn had moved to the park, a small group of people formed a community to do outreach, volunteering aid work at the growing encampment where Kaitlyn was staying. They would bring needed supplies, masks, and food on a regular basis to the folks living there. And maybe more importantly, they were developing relationships. Two of those folks, Ed and Katie, did not know Kaitlyn at first, but their paths were about to cross in a big, big way. I sat down with each of them to better understand their outreach efforts and help tell the story of what was about to happen to Kaitlyn and Prince.
I'm a playwright. I've been self-employed for some decades at a very low income level, but sustainable.
Please meet Ed.
Made time over the years to get involved with what we call social justice things. Just been wrestling with issues of privilege. And so I think I have to say, despite growing up what I perceived as poor, I'm in a certain amount of privilege in my life, and that gives me time to spend on other things. I grew up in a house full of love, sort of lower middle class, meaning holes in my shoes, but not going to bed hungry. And one of my parents, my dad, was at some level a street kid, dropped out of school in 8th grade and so forth, described himself as a housebreaker and, forced to survive in a lot of ways. So there's a certain inherited empathy for people who are outside the system of privilege at the same time. And it is also true that a lot of the past few decades, I've spent a lot of time working on issues around Palestine and Palestinian liberation. And being part of that struggle, which is 10,000 miles away, but I've been over there a lot, has enabled me to be in it and outside of it at the same time. And so it has helped me understand systemically what privilege is about, and to see myself in relation to my own world in a different way, and understand not just that it's nice to be nice to people, but that there can be an inherited responsibility for responsibility and repair and solidarity.
For those that are privileged.
For those that are privileged.
So I am the oldest of 3 children. I grew up in California till I was 8, and then we moved up here. My dad is an airline pilot.
Please meet Katie.
I grew up middle class, didn't go a day without food or my basic needs being met. So, recognizing my privilege, I have a lot of privilege in that. That being said, mental illness was still pretty prevalent in my both immediate family and with my grandmother. Both with my sister and grandmother are bipolar. That kind of shaped a lot of my growing up, and also my parents, getting a divorce when I was 18 and fighting throughout the house growing up kind of put me in a position where I felt like I grew up a little quicker than other of my peers. And I ended up going to live in Bellingham to go to school, but I really went there to get away from my parents. So I wasn't really ready for that
You're ready
yet.
to fly the coop.
No, it was maybe a bad financial decision, but a good life decision for me to kind of get out of there and experience independence. And then moved back in with my parents after that, decided to shift and go to school for graphic design, and then moved in with my partner in Ballard, and that's where I've lived for the past 9 years. Wow. Which is pretty unique, I think, to people my age in Seattle to have the same living situation for so long.
Yeah.
It's allowed me to really like root down and know my neighbors, which is something that my mom always taught me to do, is to introduce yourself to your neighbors and talk to people. And, you know, my mom would be bringing the quiche over and like watching people's kids. I watch people's pets, like just my mom was kind of very community oriented. And I think I maybe picked that up from her. And so I have the privilege of, you know, knowing my neighbors and feeling safe in my community. And then in 2020, before the pandemic, I got fired from a restaurant job because the new manager thought I was going to take his job because I had opened the restaurant and everyone was coming to me for questions instead of him. And, you know, I bought this Kia Sorento and I was going to live in it and travel the US. And then the pandemic hit and I was like, oh, maybe I won't do that. And I started just furiously sewing masks. I probably sewed like 5,000 masks.
Just on the side, just as just a kind thing to do.
It was honestly my pandemic mode. Was like, it was my routine. It was like, get up in the morning, sew masks, watch what's going on, read as much as I can about what's going on, and then realizing that many people were really struggling and realizing that our government was not supporting us. And these are all things that I like knew before, but I hadn't experienced on a collective level. And I felt like it was like the proof that I needed to be like, oh, yeah, this shit is fucked. And we don't actually have real community. And that made me really think about how things could be different and that, you know, we're not imagining well enough what things could look like. And I think there's a lot of like complacency and like just being like, oh, this is the way that it is.
Katie's life was about to take another turn. She got involved with the Capitol Hill Occupy protest, or now famously known around the world as CHOP. She started a medic station on Olive Street that turned into a large safety hub for protesters. She coordinated help and support for the people on the front line, where she herself was taking part.
I noticed how unhoused people were being treated through the uprising and noticed their displacement due to the uprising. And that was a hard thing because I was like, I believe in us being here for this, but also human beings who were living in this park can no longer live here right now.
It's been taken over.
It's been taken over, and I felt like kind of colonial about it. I was like, ooh, this is not good. We need to do something to show up for the folks that have been displaced from this, and that kind of started my foray into bringing food to people and just checking in with people. And I remember using the wiffle ball analogy a lot. If you think about a wiffle ball and all the holes and like water shooting out of all the holes from the inside, like an unlimited amount of water, and you're just like, oh, okay, I gotta plug the holes, but you only have 10 fingers. So you have to, you know, think about, am I making an impact just going around here and there and here and there and giving people sandwiches? And I kind of felt like, no. I kind of felt like, yeah, while people are receiving this and they're grateful and I maybe have touched someone and they have been like, oh, this is awesome. And that's good being spread. But I wasn't getting to the point where I was like able to see the same people again and get to know them. And I felt like that was a void. So I decided to just try to go to areas near my house where there were unhoused people instead of just all over the city like I was before. And Woodland Park is where I met Rachel, who introduced me to Ed. And that's how I started coming on Sundays to Woodland. And I really liked Woodland because it was a consistent time that we all met, and I got to know the same folks who are living there.
So, and at Woodland, you were joining in on mutual aid, basically. Is that right?
I mean, what we were trying to do is mutual aid. I think that true mutual aid is more reciprocal. I would struggle to say that we were in community with people there. I would say we were, but we weren't, right? Because we're outsiders coming in with resources. So there's already this like power dynamic. Yes, it was. We were trying to be mutual aid. That was the effort. I think that's why I say mutual aid efforts when I talk about it, because I don't want to claim that we're doing mutual aid in the same capacity as people who are like if you look at like Latino communities where people are truly watching out for each other, they're watching each other's kids, they're sending each other money, they're going on strike with each other at their jobs. Like that's more
reciprocal,
mutual.
It's woven, and the fabric's going both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, we met a lot of people, and I over time the population shifted, and other great folks came in, and there sort of came a time where I was the last of the original crew, but had been replaced by a lot of other people and other great organizers, Katie, whom you met as well, and so I had occasion to know a lot of people there by name and be one of the couple of us that could kind of map out people. And I didn't know Kaitlyn. I hadn't met Kaitlyn. I heard about her from somebody else. I met Kaitlyn when there had already been attempts to separate her from her dog Prince, who was kind of a puppy by that point, kind of a big puppy.
And I'm gonna just jump in. The first time that you had heard about this was by a group of people that were trying to clean up the park, and they were thinking that they were doing the right thing by wanting to take the dog.
Yes, there's a whole history of all kinds of people coming through the park and stealing dogs from unhoused people and giving them to the Humane Society, which then is like having your car towed and you have to pay a fee to get the dog back.
Which means it's out of bounds.
It can be. Well, a lot of people struggle. It's like your child. What I saw people who have no money is struggle to assemble $300 to get their dog back in ways.
When I first met her, she was having some pretty significant physical health issues. And like many unhoused people, not really trusting going to medical settings, hospitals or clinics, and struggling with her substance use and her mental health, and her relationships and just kind of general survival as well. She's always been someone who's incredibly fiery and knows, is not afraid to say what she thinks. And I think that's really beautiful given everything that she's been through, that she hasn't been silenced, that she still has her voice, because I see a lot of people that don't. And it's pretty hard to get that back. Not impossible, but it's a journey. And she still has that and still has her fight. And so I think when I met her, I saw that in her. I think Ed saw it in her too. Her dog was taken in a time when she was not able to take care of herself very well. And she needed her dog, to support her. And that was her dog was her rock in that time. And unfortunately, someone with power and money tricked her.
I ended up having a really bad abscess and I was going septic, with blood poisoning. And when, I don't really expect people to know what it's like, but when you are going toxic, my temperature was 1015 and then it spiked to 1027. I was becoming delirious. And I'd gone to go to the emergency room and I'd bought enough dope to make sure that I was okay while I was there. We get into the emergency room and they call me to go back to the where they take your vitals, and I ask Jay for my stuff, and he hands me almost nothing. And so, needless to say, we start arguing and we get kicked out of the hospital. And so I was so sick that I made it to the exit/entrance of Northwest Hospital, and I laid down right there. And I laid there for over a day. I was too sick. I couldn't make it to not specified, not dope sick, mind you. I was sick.
From the abscess.
I was dying. I was literally dying I was going septic, with sepsemia or whatever it's called, blood poisoning.
Kaitlyn spends the night on the sidewalk in front of the entry gate to the hospital.
Early the next morning, when the chiropractor ends up pulling out, and he pulls out and drives by us, and then stops, turns around, and comes back and parks near us, and then exits his car and comes over and starts talking to me.
Just to jump in here and clarify, we've elected not to use the name or location of the person Kaitlyn refers to as the chiropractor. We're doing this out of respect for him.
I'd let him know what was going on with me health-wise for the most part, not really telling him why, He's talks to me for a few minutes, and then mentions about how cute Prince was, and then asks me if I'd be willing to sell him. To which I respond, absolutely not. This is he's like my child. This is my everything. I asked them if they have, it's like a kid when you sell your kid. It's usually how I respond, to that question.
Because that's how you felt about Prince.
Exactly. And he asked me where I live, and I said near Green Lake. I didn't specify where. I just said near Green Lake. He asked me if I had a phone number, which I did, but I said no. But I'll, if you want, I'll take your number, and if I ever do change my mind about Prince, and I'll give you a call. Well, he asked me if I was hungry, and I said yeah, sorta. So he ends up giving me his number, and then he leaves and comes back with some Chick-fil-A, some chicken nuggets for me and Prince, and then a drink and whatnot. And then he asks me again if I'm okay, and then he ends up leaving.
Despite Kaitlyn being at the hospital, she doesn't get seen by a doctor or get the needed help. She heads back to Woodland Park. Her fever has gotten worse, remaining over 102 degrees. At some point, 2, maybe 3 days after meeting the chiropractor in front of the hospital, Kaitlyn hears her name being called at the edge of the encampment.
And that's when I hear my name. Someone says Kaitlyn, and I look up, and that's where I see the chiropractor, and he's there. He's got his girlfriend with him and his 2 dogs, his 2 pit bulls, which at the time, like I said, with my delirium, I didn't realize it was in the middle of the night. And I didn't put 2 and 2 together. Why is he...
How strange.
How did he find me in the first place? But he's like, I had to come find you. I thought about it a long time, and I felt like if I didn't find you and something happened to you, I wouldn't be able to live with that. And so he shows me the online website with his picture that shows where he's actually works there and whatnot. I wasn't intending on letting him watch him right at that point, but once we got to the car, like I said, it was all a blur kind of because of how out of it I was. We get to his truck, and that's when I'm getting his license plate number, and that's when I realized that they were talking about watching him right then. And I knew that my mom wasn't going to be able to come take him for another 2 days, and I wasn't going to make it that long. In my delirium, I could tell that much, because I've gone septic before, and I almost died before. So they end up taking Prince, and we exchanged numbers and whatnot. And I let him know that I'll be in there for a maximum of a couple days,
Kaitlyn heads to the hospital and is immediately admitted. The doctors perform surgery in the early morning, and she spends the day in recovery.
They wanted me to stay another night. I had the gauze in the wound, and it was too painful to let them take out. So, I ended up leaving against medical advice because I didn't want to be in there for another night and be away from Prince for longer. So I get out. It was a little after 11. I message, the chiropractor and ask, hey, I'm out of the hospital. I'm okay now. My mental health's not doing so great. I really need my Prince back.
Kaitlyn waits for a return text.
He doesn't respond, which I understand. It was late, so I thought, that's probably why. He works a 9 to 5. Well, then the next morning, early in the morning, he pretty much he messaged me back saying, glad to hear you're okay. I work late. My job doesn't allow me too much free time. I get off at such and such. I think he said 7 or something like that. Let's make arrangements to get you your dog back, was his words. Get you your dog back.
The exact wording of the text from the chiropractor was, quote, okay, well, anytime tomorrow evening I'm free to bring your dog back to you. I'll give you a call when I'm off from work, end of quote. We know this because Ed helped Kaitlyn recover the phone data from Kaitlyn's broken phone via a Freedom of Information Act request. There is also something else that Kaitlyn noticed that gave her pause. While looking over her hospital discharge paperwork, she noticed the time she was admitted to the hospital.
And it was 2 o'clock in the morning, almost 3 o'clock in the morning, which I was wait, I went straight from giving them the dog to watch to come straight here. So why were they there at that time of night? After 1 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of the night, with his 2 big pit bulls, when they didn't even know where I lived for sure. And so I was starting to panic, and that's when it kind of set in, I thought that I'd gotten, everything that I needed. There's no way that the Square Bear is going to, break the law and steal my dog, Joke's on me.
The next day, Kaitlyn waits to hear back from the chiropractor, per his text that he would call when off work.
So 7:30 hits, nothing. 8:30 hits, nothing. 9 o'clock hits, and I messaged him. I was like, so what's up? I don't remember exactly how I said it, but I contacted him, seeing, what was going on. No response.
4 days go by. Kaitlyn's anxiety is through the roof.
And finally, he messages me back, and pretty much along the line says that he doesn't know what I'm talking about. I gave him my dog. Sorry if I made decisions while under the influence, and pretty much started making fun and poking, fun at me for how high I was. I've never seen anybody that high.
Yeah. So he just
flipped the switch.
He just flipped.
Yep.
He became a different person, and his story changed.
Yep. I don't understand where he was mentally, but I don't think I'll ever know if he really did think I gave him the dog or not. I know for a fact he knew it was my intent to get my dog back. And he just used that. He took advantage of the situation. When he saw me with a white little fluffy, adorable husky puppy at that entrance of the hospital that day, he, from that day one, wanted the dog.
At this point, Kaitlyn contacts the police for help. It's an act of desperation on her part. Keep in mind that those in the homeless community rarely reach out to the police due to the friction that exists between living without basic needs being met and enforcement of our laws.
I called Seattle police. I talked to them for like 40 minutes, telling them everything, and then after talking to them and telling them the whole story, they tell me, "Oh, it's wrong jurisdiction. You need to call." And I talked to, and I'd feel like I finally was getting somewhere, and at the very end of telling them everything, they'd be like, "Wrong jurisdiction. You need to call." Because the guy worked in, and that's the only address I had for him, but he lived in, and I handed him over to watch him in Seattle. So I was like, I spent probably close to 6 hours getting bounced back and forth to place to place to place, and it was so hopeless feeling, because every time I'd feel like I was really getting an officer to listen to me and actually, understood what was going on, and he believed me. There was one specific officer that was a dog owner, and he really, he really said that he really was going to help, and then at the very end, he's like, "I'm sorry, but this is out of our jurisdiction." And I could tell he cared and he wanted to help, but I don't know. It concreted the feelings of when you're out here on the streets, you don't call the police. It's really looked down upon to call the police. Even if someone's getting brutally beat, it's still looked down upon to call the police.
With the power balance tipped completely in favor of the chiropractor and getting nowhere with the police, Kaitlyn decides to reach out for help to the mutual aid group that has been visiting the park regularly.
She could have at that time just given up. She could have said, "Oh, this just happens. This is just another shitty thing to happen to me," and like many people do. Instead, she was very much like, "No, this is not right," and she asked for help. And I felt good that she asked us for help, and that she trusted us enough to ask for help, and that we wouldn't do what was done to her and judge her like, "Oh, she's not able to take care of the dog." When she asked for help, it was not for us to swoop in and, do everything for her. Is that she wanted help with her mission of getting the dog back and wanted to consult with us on how that might be possible, and then trusted the methods that we proposed to her. So I thought that was really cool, that it really did feel like we were working with her on that as opposed to for her.
She was messed up, absolutely. And it was very hard, and it was hard for her not to lose her temper and get angry about things. And her cell phone kept breaking, and I watched her get mad at her already cracked cell phone and fling it down on the ground and think, "That's why your cell phone breaks all the time," So it was hard for me to know what to do, but I got the story that somebody had offered to watch her dog and was now refusing to give it back. And so I thought, well, the least I can do, if you'll tell me how to reach him, is call him up. And my first thought was, Well, I think I had several mixed thoughts, not all of which I'm proud of. But one thought was to, the one that prevailed was to call up and say, hi, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I appreciate that you could meet Kaitlyn and think that she was incapable of taking care of this beautiful dog. But you don't understand that she has a community both in the park of other people and from outside the park that are looking out for her, that are trying to help. And so we also are concerned about people's pets. And we know Kaitlyn, we know Prince, and so let's just figure this out and assure you that Kaitlyn will be able to take good care of this dog, and that we're here as well, looking out for Prince's welfare as well as Kaitlyn. So I was hoping that could be the thought I'm less proud of is some version of, do you know who you're talking to? And that he would say, a white guy who lives inside a house. Well, this is different, So I think that was mixed in there. But mainly it was to say, I assume you've misunderstood, and out of concern for this creature, you've made this choice. You don't have to make this choice, and you're causing a lot of suffering. Let's talk.
And good reason, once that person heard that there was actually a support network that surrounded Kaitlyn and Prince, that he would see the logic and the correctness of letting the dog come back to Kaitlyn.
Yes. And got the text back in response of, I don't know who you are. I don't want to talk to you. I've been advised only to talk to legal entities and so forth. So at that point, somewhere in there, I'd reached out to you, and you and I talked, and you essentially did a version of the same thing of trying to call up and assume the best, assume that we can talk and figure this out personally. I kept trying to say this because all options were on the table at that point, including police and legal action. And I wanted to say, let's not do that. Hi, friend, let's not do that. Let's solve this another way.
And he didn't go there.
He wasn't happy.
Yeah, and I did get to talk to him, but ultimately met the same wall that you found.
After several email and phone call exchanges, all of which were met with pushback, the team of volunteers at Woodland Park gathered to brainstorm next steps for helping Kaitlyn get Prince back.
Several people on the team, on our Woodland Park team, had a similar thought, which was CSOL, Seattle Solidarity, this organization that for years and years has done hyper-local campaigns, very particularly against employers and landlords. If a landlord is not returning the money or is overcharging or an employer is mistreating somebody, we're going to gather a community to target that specific place.
Put a little pressure.
Community pressure. They've been doing this. Their success rate is astonishingly good, and they have a routine. They first write a letter, and they gather a group to go in and say, hi, here's our letter. Here's what our letter says. We wish you would make a different choice about your actions. And who knows, the person might say those community and do a different thing. And then they say, if not, we're going to escalate. And that can be some phone calls, that can be some emails, that can be talking to somebody's boss. One of their principles was to be able to escalate. Don't use up all of your steps all at once. Leave them a move. Give them the opportunity to make the right choice.
Give them an out.
Several people on our team said, yeah, let's go all CSOL. And so I knew them a little bit, had participated in some of their campaigns, and so called up CSOL and said, hey, can I come to a meeting? And I wasn't thinking to ask them to take this on as one of their campaigns, but rather saying, I think we want to organize something on your model. Can I consult with you? Can I get ideas from you? And they were very open to that and receptive to that. We then started to plan, what can we do? And one of the reasons this was appealing to me as a set of strategies is that it wasn't like we had to plan a rally and try to get 1,000 people in one place at one time. It was possible to reach out and have people participate individually. And so could we plan steps that we could escalate? And how could we avoid involving police, judicial system, and so forth? demonstrate community. Demonstrate this community of caring around Kaitlyn, that she's not alone. You're not going to be able to get away with this because she has no voice, no community.
Yeah, and I have to say, it's really a model that I wish our larger community in Seattle understood better, because to keep taxing the resources of police and our judicial system, it's crazy making, right? Like, there are so many things that it's like two siblings getting in a fight and right away screaming mom. They don't need to, right? They can actually learn to kind of work it out and don't bring mom or dad into it. And in a way, I think we dial 911 so fast, and we those words come out of our mouths. I'm going to sue you so fast. The community can actually go back and forth, and in a way that is smart about it. And I just find that so beautiful that there's an alternative to calling the police.
We wanted alternatives to calling police, getting the judicial system involved. Kaitlyn had already talked to police about it, and that was a very big deal for an unhoused person to involve police in anything. So that just represented how isolated, how despairing that she felt about it, and how clear it was. She had saved texts. Somewhere in here, you also met Kaitlyn, and she was in enough physical distress that you called 911 and got her into the hospital, I believe.
Yes, I asked her, I said, do you want...
The following recording is a short 1-minute snippet of the moment when I called 911 for Kaitlyn. We want to give a warning that this may be difficult for some of our listeners to hear. Kaitlyn was in a bad state. If you remember, she had left the hospital early, against medical advice, to work on getting Prince back. She was now in her tent, dealing with a serious infection, and still without her dog.
Actually, only thing I have that actually means anything to me. My infection it's on my lower, right butt cheek. But now my lymph nodes, the ones that are right in the V of my
in your abdomen and your legs?
Yeah. The one on the right side, those ones are so swollen, I can't even walk. Like, it hurts so bad, and my whole hip is now swollen all right here. Oh yes, it's red and really, really hot. And so I can barely walk. It hurts really, really bad.
So are you able to call 911, or do you want me to call?
I'm gonna call 911, or you can call, I don't care either way. I already know they're gonna admit me, so I guarantee it, because I'm gonna have to have surgery, and they're gonna want to keep me there for at least a few days.
Stay there.
I trust you. Thank you. Seriously, I appreciate this. You have no idea.
As Kaitlyn is dealing with her medical emergency, Ed and the Woodland Park team start implementing their strategy to recover Prince.
So, where were we in the unfolding story? Oh, she had called police, and so we had to recover some of these texts from public information requests from them, so that we had the evidence of what he did. The police were not interested in taking it up. It was too small potatoes. And as we feared, her status as an unhoused person meant that she was not worth their time. Based off of the seesaw model, the first thing we did was get a bunch of people to call up the chiropractor and leave messages, some version of give the dog back. It's the simple thing, asking people not to engage if they got the person on the phone. He would certainly know what dog they were talking about. Very particularly, don't threaten, don't insult, don't
escalate.
Don't escalate in any way. In any way, deliver your message and be gone. And did a round of those. He sometimes threatened people back and so forth, but we got a round of people to do that. We asked people, just call once. Don't anybody call repeatedly. He's going to get repeated calls, but from different people. We're demonstrating that there's a bunch of people who care about it. We then did similar work to his workplace, the clinic in where he worked. Hi, you have a person here who has done an unfortunate thing. We think you need to take some responsibility for that as his employer. We, meanwhile, were planning several steps ahead. And so one thing that Seesaw does, if there's a landlord, if there's an employer, is prepare a leaflet, a flyer, so that in the neighborhood of the restaurant, they can put flyers up saying this restaurant mistreats its employees. This landlord mistreats their tenants. So we'd done that, just to draft that and have that sort of thing available. That was a couple of steps down the road to start deploying that either around his workplace or any place else. But we were still doing that, and we started to plan the next step, a different order than CSOL would have done, because we were starting with the community calling up and demonstrating there's a bunch of people who are going to say, give the dog back. Then let's go visit the workplace and give what amounts to a demand letter. We've already talked to them, so we don't have to go into much detail. But so we prepared the flyer that would sort of summarize and say, you have what amounts to a dog thief working in your clinic. And I'm sure you don't want people to think that this is a place that hires dog thieves. So what do you want to do about that? 5 of us were available to go visit the clinic, and we put on our nice clothes. We didn't wear suits or anything like that. But we gathered and made a plan to go in, and went in at a certain time and asked the receptionist if we could talk to manager, owner, whoever's in charge here today, fully expecting to have a conversation and them to go, oh, okay, thanks, bye. We'll take it under advisement. That would have been the victory condition for the day. Instead, the manager came out having already called the police and invited them to come and stop us from trespassing in the lobby of their clinic. And we argued about that a little bit. That's unfortunate, and started placing some of our leaflets around elsewhere in the lobby, at least, and say, this is too bad. And the manager said, well, this is not our responsibility. That has nothing to do with us. And of course we said, yes, it does have to do with you. It's your responsibility. It's your public facing presentation here as well. And we have no responsibility to be quiet about that. So we hope that you'll negotiate, talk, learn more, consider taking steps about this. The chiropractor himself apparently learned about this, maybe at the end of a session, came walking out past us, I think with intent to meet the police in the driveway and say, arrest these people. So there was some little conversation with him. My partner had a long listening session. My partner happens to be a world-class listener. And so sort of heard him out ranting at her in the stairwell, and we walked out and stood in the parking lot. We said, okay, we're not gaining anything by staying here and waiting for the police to come and kick us out, so let's go regroup in the parking lot. And here was the chiropractor standing some distance away. I think I regret not taking the chance to engage him more. Several of us wondered about this afterwards. We did a little bit, but we didn't make the decision, let's go talk, let's hear. This is our chance to listen. And I think several of us felt, we let that opportunity pass. To hear what his story was. We heard a little bit, and it was unfortunate what we did hear, but we could have listened more. That was an opportunity. So we stood, decided what to do. Some people didn't want to wait around for the police to show up. Ultimately, we did. They showed up. They went in and talked to people in the clinic.
Mission accomplished. The fact that the police had to come to the clinic and management and the practitioner all had to interrupt their day, the message was delivered.
Yes, absolutely. 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 It was interesting that at that point, one of our teams said, and we acknowledged that all of us felt, wow, he's never going to be persuaded. He's never going to give that dog back. It's not going to happen. And I totally understood the feeling. But I, as a longtime follower of CSOL, noticed that I was just often shocked at their victories. The victory in this kind of campaign often looks impossible until it happens.
I really didn't know how much was going on. All I know is that I was meeting up with Ed like a couple times a week, just touching base with him. Like, and I'm gonna be honest, like when he'd tell me that, you know, they were doing this, like, you know, having a bunch of people call or that they showed up at the guy's workplace, I honestly didn't believe it until I saw it with my own eyes. And it made me cry. Like, because, like, you know, you just want to think, you know, no one's going to just do that for me for nothing, you know. I think that right there, too, was a pinnacle changing point on who I am. You know, it really, fundamentally so, you know.
Just to feel that many people caring for
Yeah.
you.
While Ed, Katie, and others had mobilized, putting their plan into action, Kaitlyn was growing more worried by the day. She was scared that her prince would not remember her. A whole series of doubts and fears were taking root.
I really was. I was so scared that, because it had been months. It'd been like going on 2.5 months since he'd been gone, you know, and he was a puppy. They imprint on their first year, you know, big time. You know, and he was still like, you know, less than a year old. Inside of me, you know, I was somewhat thinking, well, maybe he is better off with him in a home, you know? Maybe, you know? And
All those doubts start rushing in.
Yep. I don't care what anybody thinks. I've done everything from day one that I can do for this dog to be what he needs as an owner. You know, even when it comes to, like, you know, if I didn't have money to get us both food, he was fed. He was never not fed. If anything, this dog ate better than anybody at Green Lake, honestly.
It was hard not to imagine having to go to Kaitlyn and give up and say, nope, we can't do it. There's nothing else we can do. It was hard not to think about that. And that kept me up at night. Just the possibility. Having stepped in, there's an implicit promise, regardless of what was actually said. So that was really unpleasant. And
I would even imagine that telling Kaitlyn that would be harder than actually continuing. Like continuing.
Oh, absolutely.
Continuing would be the easier path. Actually, just to keep hounding
Yes,
this person,
yes.
than to have to go back and break that news to Kaitlyn.
And she was, meanwhile, totally with this plan. She was, because it was more and more people fighting for her. She totally got that. She was a trooper, hanging in there, trusting that we were working, believing what we say about moving forward. And the clock was ticking with friendly, loving Prince who might be forgetting about her and bonding with a new person when weeks were turning into months about it. So, gosh, would it be too late in some way? And I had no sense of that, one way or the other.
While weeks were turning into months, things were in fact happening. The phone calls were increasing, even several from out of the country, and flyers were put up in the neighborhoods surrounding the clinic where the chiropractor worked. And then, suddenly, something shifted.
And then we got a message from somebody in where the clinic is, who is a peer counselor for homeless veterans because he had been homeless himself. And he therefore was the person who had patronized this clinic and was recommending, in the position to recommend other people to go and use this clinic. He had seen one of our flyers. So it was enough for him to get in touch and say, this is an extremely messed up situation. How shall I help? And wanted to learn a little bit more and strategize a little bit more.
So he got in touch with you guys before he got in touch with the chiropractor.
Correct. So that he could understand what was the right move in terms of any plans that we were making. So several things happened at once. A new round of calls started coming in. A couple of people saying, we'd love to listen to you if possible. And then this peer counselor sending a letter to the clinic saying this is absolutely unacceptable. It does reflect on your business. No legal or moral right to this. I'm going to tell my clients not to patronize your clinic. I'm going to talk to my friends in the local press, on the local city council, and so forth. So those things all happened within some days.
The river just crested the shore, the
It kind
shoreline.
of did. So that was happening at the same time. And suddenly he responded to my partner. He responded to Katie, the co-organizer of the team, saying, yes, we can meet and and talk. Yes, we can meet and talk. And can you help me get in touch with Kaitlyn? Asked several people. He reached out to the peer counselor and said, can you facilitate me getting in touch with this person? It wasn't clear if he wanted to negotiate or justify himself. His language in all the texts he was sending was self-justifying a lot. I'm doing the right thing here, but I'm being misunderstood, but I'm tired of it, and so forth. It was a Sunday night or something like that Kaitlyn got in touch with me and said, the chiropractor wants to get in touch and give Prince back.
And he messages me saying, where do you want to meet up? You can have the dog back. Just tell these people to stop. Like, I halfway didn't know if he was just messing with me. I don't know. It blew my mind. And so I think that's when I called Ed, I believe. And we made the arrangements. Was it that night or the next night? It was the next night, I think, to meet up at the mall to get him returned to us. And I remember fucking being so scared that he wasn't going to remember me.
So I went over to meet Kaitlyn, and one of her friends named Joe was going to join us for the ride, which was good. It was a fine thing. And we got in the car and rode up. She showed me the text, so that I knew it was all true. And where she had said, thank you, we'll meet you at such and such a time. And despite all of this, I know that you've probably bonded with Prince and in the time, and it's probably going to be really hard for you to be separated from Prince. And there is a dog park near where I live, which was the heroic Kaitlyn to me. And he had said, thanks, but I would prefer to never see or hear from you again. And he said a number of other things. Just about this has changed my attitude toward homeless people, and it could have been beautiful, and nobody understands me was his message. I've been totally misunderstood in this situation. It's just very interesting to be on the other side of the privilege wall and see what that looks like. We drove up. It was we were going to meet at 8 o'clock, and took a long drive up and went into a mall parking lot, so it's lit, but it's still sort of deserted, and so forth, and waited. The suspense was huge. Is this really going to happen? Is he really going to show up? Is it going to be another delay? Are we going to all this trouble for nothing? Is there going to be an argument at the last minute? Is there going to be a tussle at the last minute? What's going to happen here? For Kaitlyn, the suspense was still, is Prince going to recognize me? Is it possible that he could have forgotten me? Is he going to not want to leave these new people? So much anxiety from all of us. And so, okay, how can we avoid a tussle?
Ed originally asked me to stay in the car, but, being me, I couldn't. I sat by the car like he asked.
I was not announcing on the lists to my team, hey, he's giving the dog back or anything like that. It could still go wrong. So let's just wait until it happens. So lots of suspense about that. Therefore, when we got there, we were waiting. I suggested strongly, let me go over to him. Why don't you two stay over here so there's no outbreak of I don't know what in the situation. So he sat and waited, tick-tock, like some kind of prisoner exchange or something happening in a deserted parking lot. And then finally the white pickup truck drove up 20, 30 yards away and stopped. And we sat and wondered, anything going to happen here? So therefore, okay, let's do our plan. I'll go over and talk. And I walked over, and it happened that the truck drove up so that the driver's side was away from us. So I walked around the truck to the other side, not knowing quite what I would encounter. And stood looking through the window at the person we had seen each other's face before, so he had reason to recognize me. And then he opened the door and had a leash on Prince, so handed me the leash, and I said, "Hi, Prince. Hi, buddy." Took Prince out. They closed the door. No words were spoken. They moved away slowly. I think I saw them kind of looking back, very likely sad at leaving Prince. And we all wanted to see what Prince's response would be. And Prince saw Kaitlyn.
Like, he barely stops for a second, I guess, then, and opens his door, hands Ed the leash, and then he hops out. And that's when I walk forward a few steps, start kind of like, almost crying. And I squat down and I say, "Prince." And he then sees me and he bolts towards me so hard. I think he yanked the leash out of Ed's hands. And like, I'm just already crouched down, and he comes at me and tackles me so hard, I fall back onto my back. And he's like licking me ferociously, like, and like whining, like doing the little husky whine, like spinning in circles and like licking me some more. Like, I started crying, like I couldn't believe, that he was back.
Prince ran over and knocked Kaitlyn down, jumped on Kaitlyn. They're about the same size. They're almost the same size now. And hugged and were crying and yowling and laughing and rolling around on the ground. Happiest creatures. I wish I was a little sad that 50 more people were not there experiencing the moment.
What were Kaitlyn's first words? Do you remember?
I don't. They weren't to me, they were to Prince. I took a couple of random, not very good photos just so that people could see them. And then, you bet, said, "We got the dog back," to the whole team.
We get in the car, and then that's when Ed reveals to me, "I can't believe it worked." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" Like, you didn't think it was gonna work? Because he was my rock during that whole time. Like, he was so sure that we were gonna get the dog back. Just wait, And so, like, we get in the car.
He was being strong for you.
Yep.
I've fought a lot of losing battles. I've chosen a lot of battles that were unlikely to win in my life, thinking they're worth fighting for and so forth anyway. It's lovely once in a while to win a fight, to do something that's worth doing and have it work. We don't always have the chance to really help somebody out. Really, really, really do something for somebody. And I think several of us felt this, that we had the chance to help. We had the chance to have an impact.
With all the disagreements and difficult moments that arise in society, ones that come from the daily back and forth of human relationships, ones that we have all experienced, it's important to trust that everyone is doing the best they can with what they have in each new moment. Doing the best we can doesn't mean that we're always doing the right thing, nor that we should get a free pass when wrong is done to others. Rather, to just know that we're all on a steep learning curve, making mistakes as we go, learning how to be our best human self. For that, we can give each other space and grace to continue to reflect and learn. We reached out to the chiropractor, and while he declined to come on the show, we are holding space for him to reach back out to us to share his reflections. I recently visited with Kaitlyn, and I'm extremely excited to tell you that she now lives with Prince in a tiny home village. She no longer has any outstanding warrants or pending legal issues, and is working on an agreement she made with her friend Ed to address her substance abuse. She is trying with all of her heart to be her best human self, and it is showing beautifully.
So, Kaitlyn, where are you now with drugs? What's going on?
I pretty much, I've slowed way down compared, if you want the honest truth, or do you want, like the podcast truth?
They're the same.
Okay,
Honest
cool.
truth and podcast truth are the same thing.
What's it called? My case worker is supposed to be helping me get a another intake appointment. But I still use, but not nearly as bad as it. And as you can see, talking to me, it doesn't have the hold it used to have over me. You know?
I noticed it actually when you walked up. You look like a different person.
I know.
You are
way healthier.
In fact, to be honest, I expected you to say, "I'm not using it all."
Really?
Yeah, I did, because you look, the vibe that comes off of you. It feels like you have more purpose, more direction. You're kind of just more present.
Kaitlyn hopes to one day go to school and become a mortician or do crime scene cleanup. She feels with all that she has seen and lived through, she would love and excel at that type of work. And I couldn't agree more.
Ed, I have one last question for you. When you think back on this whole experience with Kaitlyn, what's the takeaway?
Being in community what made the difference. If Kaitlyn had even been by herself and somebody that was isolated on the street, and I'd been by myself, I don't know that I could have sustained this. I don't know if I would have been willing to enter into a relationship if it was just me. So community helping community was what made it possible.
Yep.
And
which brings us full circle to mutual aid.
Yes. What seems to be new in my experience is that there's a bunch of people in our larger community and region who are getting to know a bunch of different unhoused folks all over the place and are listening to what they're saying. It feels to me as if there's at least some more people who are hearing the voices of people who've been going through stuff and can report on that and can witness that as well. And so the bringing food and the helping with supplies and stuff like that is nice for survival, is a fine thing to do, and is also a tool for relationship building with another community. That's really what it was, not just individuals with individuals. That's what made it possible.
We've included a list of Seattle mutual aid groups that you can get involved with in the episode page on our website. You Know Me Now is produced, written, and edited by Tomas Bernatsky and me, Rex Holbein. We would like to thank Kaitlyn, Katie, and Ed for taking the time to speak with us. You Know Me Now has a Facebook and Instagram page where you can join in on the conversation. We also have a website at youknowmenow.com where you can see photos of Kaitlyn and Prince together, as well as Katie and Ed. We also have stories of other folks we feel you should get to know. Thanks as always for listening.